Just say the magic words. Hi, I'm Danny Quinn, and welcome to another episode of First Impressions. On today's episode, Zachary Levi steps into the shoes of Shazam in the latest addition to the DC cinematic universe. The movie revolves around Billy Batson, played by Asher Angel, a reckless young kid who's on the search for his mother. He's proven to be quite the nuisance to child services and the authorities, who've sent him to a new foster home, where he befriends the disabled superhero fanatic Freddy, played by Jack Dylan Grazer, and finds himself being selected by the wizard Shazam, played by Jaimon Hosu, to be the new champion. Now blessed with the ability to become an adult superhero, played by Zachary Levi, by speaking the wizard's name, he tries to figure out what he can and can't do, and is pushed to his limits when he goes up against the treacherous Dr. Thaddeus Savannah, played by Mark Strong, who has been blessed with the powers of the 7 deadly sins, and discovers the power of the special magic that Savannah can never fully understand. Shazam is being released at a rather strange time, and out of all the DC properties that are coming to the screen, it's easily the oddest out of them. It's being released just a couple of weeks after Captain Marvel just recently stormed the box office, and it's also coming out a couple of weeks just before Avengers Endgame hits cinemas. Not to mention, it's also the first DC Cinematic Universe film to not have any involvement from producer or director Zack Snyder, and it's also the second DC film released after the underperformance of Justice League back in 2017. And it's also following in the footsteps of the massive success of Aquaman last year, which does seem to have put some of the fears and skepticism surrounding the DC Cinematic Universe to rest. I know I personally rather enjoyed it. I didn't get around to reviewing it at the time, but I thought it was an absolute blast, and it did give me a lot of confidence in the DC slate going forwards. And that leads us on to Shazam, which is arguably the biggest risk that DC has taken to date. It's based on a superhero that was quite popular in the 1930s and 40s, but has since then been largely well known for being stuck in development hell, while The Rock was attached to star as his enemy, Black Adam. Not to mention, the character's firmly tongue-in-cheek approach does stand in stark contrast to the previous DC Cinematic Universe films, which often kind of favoured the dark and gritty template that Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy inspired. And it is admittedly a little bit difficult for me to wrap my head around the fact that this movie takes place in the same universe as Batman v Superman, because this film almost feels like the antithesis of that film. But the question still remains, does the lighter tone and largely tongue-in-cheek approach to the material work well on screen? And the answer is a resounding hell yes. Following on from the footsteps of Aquaman, Spider-Man of the Spider-Verse and Captain Marvel, Shazam is another strong addition to the superhero genre. And to say it's easily one of the most enjoyable films in the genre is really saying something when you consider just how good many of the comic book / superhero films have been as of late. A lot of what really makes this movie work is how it playfully takes the piss out of superhero lore, but also celebrates it. There's a real innocence and naivete to the film, particularly in how Billy uses his powers initially. Oh sure, he does do the odd crime fighting here and there, but for the most part he largely uses his newfound abilities for his own gain. And a lot of the fun from this film stems from how he figures out what he can and can't do, because even though he's been gifted with all these superpowers, he's quite reckless with them. He can't control them, but even as Billy Batson, he's a kid who's isolated himself from others in his search to find his mother. He's reckless, careless, and doesn't like to get attached to anyone, especially when he moves into his new foster home. He often kind of treats most of his foster siblings like dirt. Even the character of Freddy, who ends up becoming his best friend, he still kind of treats him like shit. But at the same time, that is largely intentional. It's part of his own arc, as he has to open up to his newfound family and accept them. And it's that particular aspect that I did find really touching. It really reminds me a lot of the likes of Guardians of the Galaxy and Deadpool, in how it balances its very tongue-in-cheek and humorous and off-colour approach with sweetness and sincerity. I can assume some people will probably complain that this movie is way too much like a Marvel movie because it does have a lot of humour and it's very tongue-in-cheek, but I don't really see that as being a huge problem, if I'm being honest. Especially since it's funny, like really fucking funny. For a long time, it seemed like DC had a very hard time incorporating humour into their films, even going all the way back to Superman 3, which just interjected a ton of cringe-inducing slapstick and forced comedy. And then you also have the likes of Batman and Robin, which was filled with awful dialogue and embarrassing puns about ice and plants. So I can kind of understand why they would want to take a more serious approach. I mean, it worked really well on Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, But you can't just apply the dark and gritty template and expect it to work on everything, and Shazam very much knows that. And I think with the likes of Aquaman and Wonder Woman, DC has shown that they can make fun and entertaining blockbusters without being completely joyless, or making the humour seem forced and try-hard. With Shazam, they managed to nail the tongue-in-cheek humour almost perfectly. Not to mention, the film's cast are all brilliant too. Zachary Levi is fantastic in the role of Shazam. He's charismatic and funny, while also bringing that childlike mindset that his alter ego has. You can definitely see a lot of influence from the film Big in his portrayal, and Asher Angel is also quite good as Billy Batson. Between the two actors, they both do a wonderful job of portraying the two different sides of the character. Angel plays a character with a much more uptight, defensive and cold demeanour, whereas Levi shows a much more playful, joyous and goofy side to the role of Shazam. Likewise, Jack Dylan Grazer is absolutely fantastic in the role of Freddy, the superhero fanatic who aids and accompanies Shazam throughout much of the film. He's the kind of character whose first question when he meets you is, what superpower would you have? And his interactions with both Angel and Levi are a total joy to watch on screen. They really help to sell the idea that Angel and Levi are both playing the same character. I also really gotta give a lot of props to the direction. David F. Sandberg does an absolutely spot-on job here. I know on paper he does seem like a very odd choice for a film like this, especially since his background is from horror movies like Lights Out and Annabelle Creation. But even if you weren't particularly won over by those films, I think you're gonna be pleasantly surprised by his work here. The set pieces especially are fantastic. The film as a whole isn't terribly heavy on the action, but once it occurs, it's a total blast to watch. And there's even a few instances where Sandberg's horror movie influences show through, particularly in the scenes of Mark Strong's use of the 7 deadly sins, which are all personified as these really creepy Lovecraftian-like creatures. It's pretty fucked up, but awesome at the same time. And they are genuinely very creepy and unsettling, especially for a superhero film. And they might seem a little bit out of place for what is otherwise a very light-hearted and mostly quite family-oriented film. As for more serious issues with the film, I don't have too many. I do think Mark Strong's Savannah is maybe a little generic as far as movie villains go. He doesn't have too much motivation outside of the fact that he was considered to be Shazam as a kid but was rejected, and is generally rejected by his family who treat him like dirt. But at the same time, it's not really that huge of an issue, especially since Strong is genuinely intimidating in the parts. And I think his character does serve as a fairly good counterpoint to Batson in some ways, particularly in how they're both people that have been forced to harden themselves and are isolated by their own circumstances. Another issue I do have with the film is that maybe it is a tad too long. Again, you could argue that most other DC films have this issue, especially the likes of Aquaman and Wonder Woman to a certain extent. I don't know, I don't think a Shazam movie necessarily has to be 132 minutes long, and it doesn't exactly help that the climax kind of feels like it goes on a little too long. Overall, I really love the hell out of Shazam. I think it's an absolute blast. And it shows that Aquaman and Wonder Woman maybe aren't flukes, and that the DC cinematic universe, after a fairly rough start, can get back on track and is starting to get its act together. I'm not sure if I'd say it's my favourite DC film, especially with Wonder Woman to contend with, but I do like it a bit more than Aquaman, and I definitely think with those 3 films under their belts, DC can now finally get its act together. I'm fairly confident to see what they're going to bring out next. I'm going to give Shazam a strong 8 out of 10. I strongly recommend seeing this film. I mean, if you haven't seen it yet, by all means, give it a shot. It's not nearly as portentous or as somber or as joyless as something like Batman v Superman, and it's also not nearly as faux edgy or try-hard as something like Suicide Squad. It just hits the sweet spot perfectly, I think. And if you're looking for a superhero film that doesn't just aim to blow everything up and tries to tell a good story, I could honestly recommend this very much. So Shazam, have you seen it yet? If so, what did you think of it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you once again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to leave a like, leave a comment, maybe even subscribe to my channel while you're at it. If there's anything I can do to improve my presentation, do let me know. I'm always happy to hear feedback as long as it's somewhat constructive. And if you want to follow me on social media or support me on Patreon or check out my website, links are below down in the description. And until next time, I'm Danny Quinn, and I hope you have a pleasant evening.